So I'm going to go ahead and use my rectangle tool. I think the hotkey is U on that. The color totally doesn't matter. We'll get rid of that color in a little bit. So something about like that size, I think. It's at a little bit of an angle, so it's hard to guess, but just do the best you can. That's the first step, is to make a rectangle. Color doesn't matter. The second step, which is the most important step, is to right click and choose Convert to Smart Object. This is going to change the shape of your rectangle so that it can be something you put artwork into, which is really handy. The next thing I'm going to do after I've done that Convert to Smart Object is to go ahead and go to the Edit menu and Transform. I'm going to choose Distort. This feature here under the Transform features allows me to pull on the handles, and as you can tell, it sort of seems like it's leaning backwards into space. So what I'm going to do is just trying to tuck these corners into the frame so that they fit on that frame in the right sort of distorted perspective. So something like that. I can always fine tune it here in just a minute. I'm going to go ahead and click OK when I'm done with my free transform. Now that I've made this a smart object, what you should see is if I double click into this picture plane, this sort of thumbnail that's next to my rectangle 1, it will open up a new document. And the new document, the rectangle should not look distorted. If the rectangle looks distorted, it may be that you accidentally didn't do the smart object before you distorted the rectangle shape. So here it is on this picture plane. It's at an angle, it's distorted, the shape has changed, but here it's very, very flat. So now all I need to do is get my artwork. Let's say this is my finished artwork of my custom lettering and some photography of the sky that I took. And I want to flatten all of this and put it into this document here. This is a .psb file. It's sort of a fancy file. Very important that we don't change the save location of that file for this to work. When we save, we'll just do a standard save. So I'm going to go ahead and select all of the things that I've gotten here, or I can just go to the corner of my layers panel and choose Merge Visible or Merge Layers. Either way, this will just flatten everything. So let's do that with everything. So I'm going to do Merge Visible. And that will just flatten everything into a single layer here. There it is. It's all just on one spot. I want to make sure I don't save this file in that way, because otherwise I won't be able to make edits anymore to my layers. But I should be able to drag this layer. I can essentially just move it with my move tool, click and drag on the whole thing, go up to my rectangle1.psb, and then still dragging, come down and drop it off. Now here in this version, I'm going to hit Command Z to go back before I flattened everything, because I don't want it to be flattened. I want it to be sort of separated out. And I'm going to save this one. Command S to save, make sure that's separate. If I go back to my rectangle.psb, I want to make sure that this artwork fills the majority of this space. So I'm just going to free transform this to a slightly bigger scale. Hopefully it doesn't pixelate too bad, but most of this mock-up stuff is going to be shared on the screen anyway. Probably not printed, so we don't have to worry about too much. So I'm going to make sure it doesn't look funky. So I'll get this lined up as best I can so that that artwork is nice. If you have good margins on your artwork, that will definitely help making mock-ups. So try not to have too much that needs to be like perfectly aligned to the corners or edges or something. Sometimes the mock-ups are different scales or different sizes and things. So I free transformed it a tiny bit to sort of fit into the space. Now to make sure that this is updated in the one that I want to show that looks like it has artwork on the wall, I just need to file and save. Not save as, don't choose save as, don't change the file location. It's a linked file to your mock-up page that you're working on. So I can just do Command S or Control S if you're on a PC. And when I save that, it should automatically update in the previous file. So now I have my artwork, and as you can tell, because I distorted that rectangle to look like it's at an angle, it looks like it's sort of angled in that frame. Now we could stop here, to be honest, but if you can tell, there's a few places where it doesn't really feel like it's actually in the frame. It just sort of feels like it's a distorted rectangle that's sitting on top of the frame. So I'm going to do a little bit more to this. I'm going to go to my edit and transform and distort one more time and make sure that I'm getting these really lined up. And what I'm going to do is just make sure that there's a little bit of an edge underneath so that I can mask out the areas that I want to include in this. Now this mock-up is really handy and nice because it's just a flat white background. Some of the mock-ups that you might want to use have other artwork in them, and you have to do a little extra steps of like removing artwork or backgrounds or something. So I'm just making there's a little bit extra space there. What I'm going to do is turn off my rectangle. There's some words in here, so maybe let me take those out so that those aren't in the way. I can use like the spot healing brush probably to take out those text. I'll just duplicate this background layer. And let me go ahead and take out these letters here. Boom. Spot healing brush. It's good at manipulating backgrounds and things. Then what I need to do is find the selection of this. So let me see if I can do maybe a polygonal lasso tool, since it's pretty rectangular. It's when you can just click and move away, click and move away. I want to make a selection of where this should fit underneath the frame. And I might fine tune this selection with some brushes. I'll just do a nice rectangular selection first. There we go. Now that I have that selection, I can turn on my artwork and then just hit the mask button at the bottom of my layers panel. It looks like a circle in a rectangle. And that's pretty helpful because it sort of looks like it's fitting in the frame a little bit better now. I might go to some of the corners here and make sure that that's lining up the way that I want it to. I can go onto my mask if I need to add more to the mask. I can paint with white to reveal things or paint with black to cover up. Just make sure you have your mask selected and not painting on your paint layer. Turn up my opacity. I'll make a nice hard round brush. And I'll use white here. Photoshop's really useful. You can click and then move away and hold shift and click, and it'll draw a straight line between two areas. So for me, lining up this in my frame doesn't have to be too terribly difficult. If I know where I want that edge to be, I can just hold shift and sort of line that up. Holding down the space bar to move it around. Spacebar will get that little hand symbol shown up. All the way to the corner. Most of the time with frames, the corners aren't going to be perfectly straight. So if you want it to look pretty realistic, it helps if you get that to line up in the corner. Customize the corners a little bit. I'll click and go all the way over here and hold shift. Click again. That'll just draw a straight line between those points. Hold shift and click. There we go. That looks better there in that corner. Click up there, hold shift. And here I'd say I need to cut a little bit extra on this. Click here. Yeah, I did a little bit too much on that side, so click once. Top, shift, click again. That's something. So what I can do, if you can tell, this looks way too bright maybe for the space. I might change my blending mode a little bit if I want it to pick up a little bit of the shadows behind it. Those are a little bit too extreme. Let me do this a different way. Overlay looks okay. Sometimes you make two copies of this and one of them is a different blending mode than another. So overlay and then maybe multiply. What I can do if this is the overlay one is just lower the opacity until the brightness looks good. And this one I can lower the opacity until the dark pixels look like they match up with the photograph. And this needs to look like it's got some reflections and shadows on it. I think this frame sort of seems like it's got glass over top. There's a pretty bright highlight on this side. If I want to bring that back, I could make a new layer. And change this corner a little bit. It's a little messy. Yeah. I can make a new layer and then just paint white And a nice little stripe here, similar to where that layout is, or that highlight is, excuse me. If I wanted to trace it, I could just make sure that that layer is selected. Click down here with that bright white, hold shift, click up here, we'll do a straight line between those. I can turn this back on. And then let's choose a different blending mode for this one because it is just too of a bright highlight. So maybe like soft light would look pretty good. Might lower the opacity on it just a little bit. And we're starting to make some mock-ups that feel like they fit together pretty well. So it looks like it's got a little bit of an angle. Because I changed the blending mode, again, I have a multiply with a certain opacity. I just sort of tried to guess at what would feel like it's fitting in the photograph. And then I had a duplicate copy of this set to overlay. Again, just trying to choose the overlay percentage or opacity percentage that feels like it fits in with the photograph. What's nice about this is it's picking up some of the natural shadows. You can see those shadows that are just underneath that frame there. That's making it look like it's really in that frame, which is nice. So spend a little bit of time making the mask look nice. Again, started out with a rectangle, right-clicked, changed that to a smart object. Right-click on the layer, go down to convert to smart object was that one that we chose there. Then I went to the edit, transform, and distort feature to be able to pull on the corners so that it has the correct angle. There's plenty of different mockups that you could use for these that are stock photos. Some of them are a lot easier than others. Then I double-clicked on the thumbnail of the smart object to be able to go to the document where I can lay out my artwork nice and straight. And then I went to my Photoshop file that has my artwork on it, and I went to the corner of the layers panel, chose merge visible. That will flatten all my layers. I could actually just do flatten image also, which would just flatten everything into a single layer. And then using my move tool to move that to my different tab and then dropping that off. And we pre-transformed that to fit in, Command and T. Found a way to get that to fit, hit Command S to save it so that it updates in the original. And then you've got your thing at an angle. I then just did a little bit extra work on the corners to try and get them a little bit more organic rather than so geometrically flat. Here's one where I can also manipulate that. That looks a little bit better to me. Masks are things that you can paint on. If you paint with black, it will cover up. If you paint with white, it will reveal whatever's on that layer. In this case, it's sort of a flattened version of my artwork. Also throw on some adjustment layers onto this whole composition if I wanted to. Added in a highlight on its own layer. I adjusted this to be a soft light and I lowered the opacity a little bit as well, so it wasn't quite as bright. And then if I wanted to add adjustment layers, that would be maybe the last thing I would do on this, which is this sort of half and half circle down here. You can add in adjustment layers of like curves or brightness and contrast. Curves is usually a really good one. Most of these adjustment layers could be controlled in your properties panel. So if you don't see that showing up right away, you just need to open up the properties panel. So I could work on properties over here and see that I have that curves layer selected. And then just sort of push and pull the lighting on this whole composition. That already looks a little bit nicer. And these stock photos from Unsplash are fantastic, but if you do just a little bit of adjustments on those, it really makes a big difference. Should be brighter maybe. I think that feels pretty good. Let me do one more adjustment layer. Let's do color balance. Color balance is one of my favorite ones. Color balance has got shadows, midtones, and highlights, and then you just pull the sliders back and forth to sort of change them. And you can see what that does for the composition, right? So it gives it a different feel. A lot of times I don't want to be too like adjusting everything to feel green or anything. I just want to give it a nice feeling to it. I'll do midtones and highlights in the same way. And you know, this just gives this a very sort of professional, finished, printed feeling, which I find clients absolutely love seeing their stuff this way. And it doesn't have to, you know, cost you a ton of money because you're not actually printing it. You're just using Photoshop as a tool to be able to make stuff look like it's really finished. So I feel like I gave this maybe a little bit of a like yellow blue shift or something, but color balance, that looks kind of fun anyway. Any questions about the process before I stop recording? I will share this link. I'll post it to YouTube's and stuff. Any questions about the process that we just went over for making mock-ups?